Hello, everybody. My name is Road to Recovery, and you are once again tuned in for another fantastic interview. Today, I have Mark, who is a licensed clinical social worker. And Mark is going to be, well, his practice area is stress, and I'm going to allow him to introduce himself and talk a little bit about his practice and what he does for a living. Mark, please take it away.
Hey, well, hello everyone. My name is Mark. In addition to being a therapist, I have over the years been a workshop leader, stress and violence prevention consultant for the U.S. Postal Service, uh, led stress and team building retreats for the U.S. military. Um, so stress is something that started very early in my life. My father had a breakdown when I was 1.5. And back then, unfortunately, shock therapy was the mode of choice. And as you can imagine, and it becomes a secret, as many of you know, that we grow up in families where there are a lot of things that are never really talked about. In fact, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. That's one of the 12-step mottos of adult children of alcoholics. So we know, and this is why I'm rambling a little bit, but why I'm wanting to give you a context. Family background, life experience in your family, in addition to peers and school, and all these things create a cauldron for stress, depression, rage, hiding out, trying to be invisible, losing your voice. But sometimes, if we can face the past and the present, the stress from the past, the stress in the present, there's such a thing as post-traumatic growth. It doesn't just have to be PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. There can be post-traumatic growth. So that's why it's so important to be able to do, again, as we call it, an honest inventory of ourselves. Where are the where are the the habits that we've developed based on our fears, based on uh, our feeling of hopelessness and helplessness? What were the survival mechanisms that we needed to develop as a child, as a teen, as a young adult that kept us alive, but are no longer working at this point in our more adult lives? So basically, okay, I'll define stress and just quickly. It's really a series of reactions in the mind and body, your psyche and your physiology to some kind of threat, loss, or challenge that you're facing. And basically, do I have the resources to cope with that? And if I do, then I can eventually manage it and learn something from it and grow from it. But if I don't, or I don't believe I have the resources, then I'm going to fall back on old patterns, often old addictive patterns, escapist patterns, whether it could be porn, whether it could be eating, whether it could be sleeping, whether it could be being like a workaholic. I mean, there's a whole series of patterns that we can engage to help us survive. I mean, that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to survive. It's not that most of us are bad people, but we're feeling hopeless and helpless, and we don't know how to respond differently.
Mark, in your line of work, do you see a lot of behavioral addictions from people that come in the door?
I think the whole world is addicted. I mean, it's so easy, and especially in our consumer oriented, escapist oriented society. Look at the phone. How many people do you know aren't somewhat addicted to a phone these days? I mean, it's out there, and it takes a lot of purposeful, concentrated effort, and this is what we learn as in 12 steps is you can't do it by yourself.
Mm.
So it takes not only a purposeful recognition that I there are certain things I'm helpless, I'm powerless, and I'm going to need other people as well as my own, you know, structure and plan to help me manage both this sort of crazy world that we live in and survive what was a crazy past that just all I could do was keep my head above the water.
Before we go too far there, I just want to emphasize because these are things I've been talking about. You talked about having structure and you talked about being able to communicate with other people. So that type of thing is so critical because it's something that I've discovered. And just to disclose for the audience here, Mark and I met each other inside of a 12-step room. So I was coming in completely destroyed, and this was a person who had spent years inside of rooms. In addition to having his own practice, he knew what was going on. And it was great that I got a chance to meet you, Mark, because you were able to even talk to me. I was isolated in 5 different shells. I was a person who did not know how to communicate to others about my personal problems. And meeting you was one of the factors that helped me open up and be able to talk openly about the problems that I was having. And it just so happens that a lot of people that are in those rooms have very similar problems. Being able to leverage into a network of people that can communicate on the same language was just a godsend for me. So thanks. I appreciate that.
Well, and I do want to say one thing. It wasn't that I was like a magician and somehow bringing out. It wasn't that I was a magician bringing out something that you had no. I mean, you. It was waiting to be tapped. It was waiting to be touched. You had the gifts and the blessings and the strength inside you, but we sometimes don't understand that. And we find in many of the 12 step groups, people not only are in denial about what we call their defects, their self-defeating coping mechanism, we're often in denial about our own strengths and our own capacity, a capacity to be courageous, a capacity to love. So it's a real yin and yang. We have to be able to discover our fearful coping and our self sabotage, but at the same time, we need to be able to embrace our strengths and recognize that a lot of the bad decisions, bad choices that we made were so fueled by just trying to survive, in the environments that we found ourselves in as a child, as a teen, as a young adult. And if we can do that, and if you can face the old fear, because stress is often a cover up, not only of immediate uh, challenging situations, scary situations, depressing situations where we're dealing with loss and we don't even understand that we're dealing with loss. I remember so many people that I talked to in the start of COVID couldn't understand why they couldn't get out of bed. It wasn't that they were sick with COVID, is that they were just at a loss. They would, their world was changing. The world was turning upside down, and they didn't know that they needed to be grieving. So often we're not even aware of the need to grieve, so that we carry around in a way this emotional weight. And grieving is a way of reducing the number of the pounds of heaviness in the knapsack that we're carrying around, that invisible knapsack. So all these things come together in a way that once we begin to integrate, talk about, face the feelings. For me, sometimes I don't like little quip quippy, easy slips off the tongue very easy. You can't heal if you can't feel. But there's some truth to it, and facing those emotions when we're been taught to intellectualize, analyze, disguise, you know, to escape, to keep busy with other things. The price is we don't feel and we don't build what I call our emotional muscles. And this is where we begin to get some courage. Wow. I remember in basic training, this general said to us in orientation week, men, back then there were just men, you were going to do things of which you never thought you were capable. And he was right. And so it's when we can face things that we've run away from. Again, it doesn't have to be alone. You don't have to do it one on one. You can do it with stress buddies, as I call it. In 12 step, we call them recovery buddies. But, but whether it's a stress buddy or recovery buddy, you don't have to do it alone. But the hardest part, and I see it with my clients, is there's a pride factor, there's a shame factor. I don't want to ask for help. I can hear my mother's voice. Mark, God helps those who help themselves. There's some truth to that. But she was coming from a place where she didn't want to talk. You don't share that dirty laundry with anyone.
Yep.
I mean, her father died at 16. Oh, my father was always busy. I didn't know him. I didn't see him that well. It wasn't a big loss. It wasn't a big loss. Of course, it was a big loss. But she tried to compartmentalize that, sort of deny it. And that's the other thing. We internalize how the people in our lives, especially our parents, older siblings, how they felt about themselves. We're like a part of a drama, a family drama that we didn't even know we bought a ticket for the play. But we're absorbing. So it's not just that they were, verbally critical or abusive, or we're also absorbing their unconscious feelings about themselves, their shame, their helplessness. So it's a we're in a cauldron, and they're just, or maybe that's not even the best word. I mean, we're in an ecosystem, ECHO, an ecosystem where all these voices and memories, are part of who we are. And that's why it is important to begin to do what I call your head work, your heart work, and your head work. With, as was said just before by my illustrious interviewer, I don't want to use his name. Of course, now my dementia is kicking in. And I can't remember what he said, but you don't have to do it alone.
And I think that's the biggest problem, Mark, is that dealing with a lot of the people that I'm working with, I think the biggest obstacle I have to overcome in order to help them is that it's difficult to get them to take that first step, which is, one of the fundamental things that I preach is that don't do this alone. And unfortunately, we have in our culture right now, when you just talked about COVID, so you had a mass isolating event But in addition to COVID, we live in a digital culture now where people just self-isolate and they feel completely comfortable doing it. So you have literally this entire generation of people who either have a cell phone in front of them or are on a computer all the time. And when they get out of whether it's work or school or whatever, rather than going out and socializing in a meaningful way, in other words, having deep, impactful conversations with other people, it's either superficial conversation or it's immediately get the heck away from everyone, sometimes a mixture of both. And so this collection of people that are out there right now that I'm working with, the hardest thing they have to do is be able to have an honest conversation with another human being, and it's a major blocking point. It's so much so that I've been encouraging people. It's like, hey, man, seek therapy. Like, go to a therapist if you need to get that, you know, training wheels on in order to how to talk to another human being and be able to talk about yourself. But I know one of the things that helped me was getting inside of a 12-step room. And I'm not saying that it has to be a 12-step room, but it could be group therapy, it could be whatever. Getting inside of a room where there's other people there whom you will allow your guard to be dropped down and you can actually have a conversation. I know that was difficult for me. It took a lot of work. It was days before, like several meetings before I was able to start feeling comfortable doing that. But there is this release, at least that happened with me, and I was one of those isolating people that happened with me where I started feeling comfortable, and then it just flowed out of me. And I'm hoping some of the people that are listening will be able to get a little bit of encouragement and feel like, okay, I can do this. It's easy. There's lots of 12-step rooms that are out there. You can find them online, look them up, and just jump in one and just get your feet wet. But anyway, Mark, I don't mean to steal the stage. Go
No, no,
ahead.
no. It's I want to. I mean, because of course, I all I can say to what you've said is amen and women to that. You know, but I think we want to take one step back, and that is what gets most people into a 12-step room? A crisis. Something has happened that all their survival mechanisms, all their defense mechanisms can't deal with. And sometimes you've got to, you know, really fall down and hit your face on the concrete
Mm.
before you wake up or before you realize, holy shit, I am hurting and I don't know how to fix this. And so, in a way, I remember a phrase from the IT world, fail faster. So, in a way, if something happens that's painful and you know you screwed up, see if you can, instead of just covering it up, putting a band aid on it, take it as a warning sign, take it as a red flag. And then you can do, then you might be motivated enough to do what was recommended, get into some kind of therapeutic, supportive environment.
Well, this is a perfect segue because you're just talking about this warning signs. So, what are the warning signs that a person should be looking for?
Well, there are a lot of common warning signs. You know, sleep disturbance, sleeping's more, not sleeping at all, eating patterns, binging, getting, not eating. Um, you mentioned withdrawing from, if you used to have friends and you're basically withdrawing, or you only have interaction with people through online gaming. Um, or you're starting to lose interest in the things that once really kind of gave you a little bit of joy. Mood, mood changes, fluctuations, depressed. You're just feeling lethargic. You're feeling drained. It was like this one. It's interesting. People are isolating, but still there are a lot of people pleasing people. And what do people pleasing people do? They always put others first and put themselves second. And someone said burnout's less a sign of failure and more that you gave yourself away. You're not learning how to. In my stress workshops, one of the most frequent comments I get is, Mark, until I learned how to say no, I was living on the edge of stress.
Mm.
And why is saying no difficult to people? One, you don't want to disappoint them. You don't want them to be angry at you or say critical things or think critical thoughts. You were told that, you're there to help others. That makes you, I can relate to this, being a good little boy. And no means that you're breaking away from the group a little bit. You're not just going along with the herd. You're finding your voice, your real voice, not the voice that you were trained to have. That's a very important life skill, survive and a healthy survival skill.
I think this
And
what I hear is like sort of the echo of boundaries as well. Like,
good
learning
word.
learning what your boundaries should be in the first place. And I can say this from being inside of a 12-step room. Everybody comes in thinking that they don't have boundary issues, but inevitably you discover that you do. And it's not uniform for all people. Some people will have good boundaries in some areas, but not others, right? And it's through this discovery path that we go through that we say, oh, yeah, how come I didn't stand up for myself on this point? And then you start to realize that was a pattern behavior inside of your life that probably extended way back. Then you start to go through some real self-discovery at that point. But the great part about that is like once you get to the discovery, like you've all of a sudden you've identified this problem that was likely affecting your behavior, your mood, everything about what you do and who you are, that can be simply fixed by sometimes just saying no and recognizing when you need to say no, which is the more important part. And I know that I've identified with that. It's been huge in my life.
I often share this. So how do you say no? It sounds easy. Just two letters. Here's what I say. When it's usually kind of a friend or maybe a family member that you're not totally intimidated by, you could, when they ask you, let's say, to do something for them, and your plate's just about ready to topple over. It's important to be able to say, I understand this is important, but right now I just got too many things going on. And what I can say is I can't help you with ABC. Maybe I can help you with DEF, or call me back in a day or two. And things might be different and I might be available. Now, if people are used to you saying yes, how do you think they're going to respond to that kind of message you're giving them? They're not going to be happy
Mm.
because they're used to you being there for them all the time, whenever they need you. So the key now is to basically just reaffirm what you said initially, because if they start getting you to start, to feeling a little bit guilty, and then you start trying to justify why you're saying no and sort of becoming apologetic, you're like a fish on the hook, and they're going to reel you in.
Mm.
So it's important to be able to say, as I said before, right now, here's my reality. And you might want to affirm, as I said, I probably can't do that, now, but call me back in 2 days. Yeah. So you want to keep it concise. You're not being hard. You're not, and people are going to say, oh, you're suddenly so cold, or selfish. I mean, this is the old manipulative BS that people will throw at you.
Mm.
And we feel it sometimes because we haven't learned that it's really okay for us to have our own voice and our own boundaries and our own ability to say no. Now, what about the big honcho? Let's say in in the workplace, or some what do they do in a certain situation? Oh, the sky's falling down, drop everything. You got to respond to this now. First of all, don't let someone else's false sense of anxiety, false sense of insecurity become your anxiety. That's the key. It's not the only thing that's a real emergency in life is life and death. Everything else can be prioritized. So don't let someone's panic, get you all shaken to a point where you no longer have boundaries. So they can take over and take you over. So what I will say in that, what I recommend is to say, I understand this is a very important situation. Because it's such an important situation, I'd like to, before I, just jump in, help me prioritize my work so that I can put certain stuff on the back burner for the moment while I concentrate on this very important issue for you or with you. Think about what I've just done. I reframed, I didn't buy into it's an emergency. I said it's an important situation. Just because I define that condition, I'm feeling a greater sense of control. I'm protecting myself, sort of like I've given myself a vaccination against that person's, you know, uh, overarching panic and contagious panic. And then I've said, you know, I basically said I can't just put another thing on my plate. Let's take a few minutes. Help me prioritize here. What do you want me to focus on, and what can I put on the shelf for the moment? And most of these big egos, like to be, they'll tell you how to, do how you should prioritize and so you're stroking their ego, even though But don't. That's how you set boundaries in a healthy way. You don't just react. You become mindful of what are the dynamics here. What do I need to say to protect myself? What do I need to say to establish realistic expectations with this other person, and not to be just kind of bulldozed. So it's being aware that you have rights. You have the right to say, wait a second, I'm not clear here. And that's also very important, just to be able to know that you don't have to have this perfect image. I get it all the time. No, you know what? Something doesn't sound right. I can't even tell you what it is, but something doesn't sound right. We need to talk about this further. Allowing yourself to be human, to be imperfect, is not a sign of your weakness. It's a sign that you have enough courage to be authentic. And that's one of the greatest gifts you can learn to evolve. And that's where the groups, therapy, having, good stress buddies, where you can really share and get honest feedback. And you don't feel the person's judging you or trying to humiliate you, but they're trying to help you perhaps see another perspective. Now, the challenge of being someone who wants to give someone feedback is we see the person's defects, obviously. Oh, come on, you got to do this, this, and this.
So
And
glad
of
you're
course,
talking about this.
and the place you want to start is not telling people to see the obvious, but asking questions about, it's kind of almost strange. I see it this way. You're seeing it that way. Help me understand where you're getting your perceptions from. What's your foundation for this, for your framework. I remember once defining respect is not putting someone on a pedestal. telling them how, oh, so I've learned so much for you. So one of real respect is paying careful attention to a person's lived experience, emotional framework, and worldview. And think about it. Why is that? First of all, in our ADHD, phone driven, you know, nobody has time for anything but myself world. How can we really be paying respect, be respectful if we're not paying careful attention to a person's lived experience, emotional framework, and worldview? So it means not just living on an automatic pace, but again, your interviewer can tell you what he's learned from meditation and becoming more mindful and slowing down. I mean, that's a part of it. It really is a big part of being able to have more choices, have better boundaries, and not being so reactive. Because once we're on reactive mode, then we're going to fall back into habits that we've been carrying around for a long time. And, those are the things that get us in trouble most of the time. Anyway,
Yeah, Mark, and
say something.
we're running up on. I just wanted to just do a time check because we're gonna have to do a hard stop at 10:45. Just it's the limitation of the platform we're on right now. Um, so these are all fantastic, and I'm glad you brought in the fact that bringing in the recovery buddy and what it means to be an effective recovery buddy as well, because it's going to be new probably for the person if they're new to the program too. And I think that's one of the hardest things is just stopping sometimes and just listening, right? And rather than trying to assert a solution, asking a question instead, qualify things and just trying to, form dialogue. Because I think the best thing that happens, it's the same thing we do in therapy, right? By constantly talking, by constantly getting the truth out of your brain and throwing it out there and just being able to get a chance to look at it, it allows not only the person who's doing the talking to be reflective, but also the person who's listening to be reflective as well. And then all of you can look at what's going on there and get a bigger sense of the picture and what might be happening. And I've discovered that that's really key for me. Like for me, I have to be able to talk so that I get it all out of my head. And sometimes just the act of having that conversation where something was stuck in my mind and it made sense there, but I said it with my mouth and I'm like, did I just really say that? You go through this surreal experience where it's like, yeah, that thought didn't make a lot of sense at all, or whatever it happens to be. But you'll be surprised about the inner mechanics of your mind and how sometimes things are making sense when it's in there, but you nestle it out there and you're just like, it gets to the rational conversation. Like all of a sudden you had to make that thing rational. And I go through a lot of reflection at times, being able to say, oh, you know what? There was a lot of cognitive distortion going on when those ideas are rattling around inside of my mind. But when I threw it out there, the filters are off, man. Came out there, and I got a chance to actually look at it and say, oh, wow. Ooh, ooh.
And think about it, because so much, especially of emotional content, we were taught to keep it, stuff it down. You don't talk about things. That's unmanly. You know, and why didn't people in our family want to talk us to talk about these things? Because they didn't want to face these emotions and issues themselves.
Yep.
So, what did I once say? The strong silent type. For me to be strong, you must be silent.
Oh,
That's
well, Mark, I want to thank you for coming on and doing this interview with me. And I think this is going to be very beneficial for a lot of people in the audience. And it's fantastic anytime we can get people on who are knowledgeable in the subject matter, and you are certainly knowledgeable in stress. And I think at some point in the future we should probably do a follow-up to this. And I think we could probably keep going, but I'm out of time now.
okay. Okay, one more time so I can get it right.
Well, it's always fun having you on. And when we're just talking about recovery buddies, Mark happens to be a recovery buddy of mine. Like we go on a weekly diner run. So we sit down and have conversations, and are usually very deep. And I enjoy some coffee and usually some pancakes, and we're eating and having a conversation. It chews up less than an hour of my time, and it's probably the best hour I spend every week. So thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. Anyway, this has been Road to Recovery. If you like what you hear, please subscribe. You can reach me at roadtorecovery11@yahoo.com. You can also go up to my profile and you'll find my Twitter account, and you can DM me if you have any questions, or go ahead and follow on my Twitter profile. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, bud.
All right, everybody, stay on that path to recovery. Take care of yourself.